Now it is my pleasure to introduce our commencement speaker, Dr. Irwin M Jacobs. His distinguished biography is included in your programs. But Dr. Jacobs is one of MIT's most illustrious and successful graduates, whose leadership of the telecommunications industry, his advocacy of science and math education, and his philanthropy in education and the arts are inspiring and in the best tradition of MIT. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, graduates, and graduates-to-be, Dr. Irwin Jacobs.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here with you on this very special occasion. And I would like to give special thanks to President Susan Hockfield for asking me to provide this address. I'd also like to congratulate the class of 2005 on this very special day and provide welcome to the family and friends of the graduates, to the faculty here, to the entire MIT family. It really indeed is a very special time. It's a very great day to graduate. I remember back to receiving my graduate degrees here, a master's and a doctorate, back in 57 and 59, quite a few years ago, fitting very well in with the 50-year reunion class. I must say that at that time, I could not possibly have imagined all of the things that were going to happen in my life over the succeeding years. And that indeed is something I'd like to pick as the theme today, namely that we're all going to, and in particular you are going to, be going through a great deal of change, providing both opportunities and occasionally some problems, but that in fact an MIT education is about the best possible way to prepare yourselves for this very exciting future. I suspect, again, that a few years from now, when you have the opportunity to think back, there'll have been many things that you just could not have anticipated. And so it's important to be prepared for those changes. My life itself has been a number of changes. I'll use those for an example. I actually was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, not too far from here. When I graduated high school, I had always been interested in math and chemistry, physics. My high school counselor advised me that there was, and this was 1950, that there was no future in science nor in engineering. And since I didn't really have a measure to evaluate that, I then took his advice. My family had a small restaurant, and so I entered the School of Hotel Administration at Cornell University. Well, I had an engineer as a roommate after a year and a half of hearing him talk about you couldn't possibly get those grades if you were in engineering, and knowing I really preferred engineering. Again, I made a very significant change in life and decided to transfer over to electrical engineering. And that was a very exciting period. I was a co-op student. That turned out to be very useful. One of the engineers I worked with then advised me to go on to graduate school, and that's how I ended up at MIT. But thinking back, in my last term at Cornell, and this is how fast things have changed, I took a course in the theory and practice building of vacuum tubes. Built a 6SN7, a 6J6. You probably never even heard of these terms any longer. I was reminded of it all last week when I gave a talk at the Computer Museum in Mountain View, and that in fact has a lot of equipment that originally came from a computer museum here in Boston, but now is out in Mountain View, California. And so as I toured around looking at all the equipment, seeing analog and digital differential analyzers up to cell phones, which of course are the latest, most powerful computers, I'll come back to that, that it was amazing to me how fast things have changed. And again, that's the key issue with change. It was amazing to see all these familiar items that had been in my life and then passed out of it so quickly. Well, I did decide to apply and luckily was accepted here at MIT to graduate school. Originally came thinking that EM theory, electromagnetic theory, would be an interesting area, but MIT at that time, Professor Claude Shannon had just come, father of information theory. There was a lot of interest in the theory, the mathematics, probability theory, etc. And so I decided that that would be my future, and very pleased with that decision. One of the early courses I took was from Professor Norbert Wiener. Now, I don't think probably anyone here might have had the opportunity, but it was very interesting. There were many tales, I'm sure, still running around MIT about Professor Wiener. Our one that I most remember in taking this class, probably like several of the classes you might have taken, the lectures were, well, I shouldn't say this, probably it's not the case anymore, but the lectures were incomprehensible. And so each night, a group of graduate students would get together and try to figure out what it was we had heard during the day and kind of put it together in a way that we could understand. About halfway through the term, Professor Wiener heard that we were doing this, came to the room and said, "Can I look at the material?" Became interested, said we should make a book from this. And so we then continued to put the material together as a book. He would come in every day after class, and his only question was, how many pages are we up to? So he always had a different slant on things. That book did come out. It's Nonlinear Problems in Random Theory, so it was the first book that I was ever involved with. Went on the faculty here. Again, it's a wonderful way. If some of you are considering careers in teaching, I'd greatly recommend it. It's the best way to learn material. And while here, decided with Professor Jack Wozencraft to put together a textbook for a senior level communications course on applying what was then brand new digital theory and information theory and try to give it a little bit more of a practical face. And there were many at the time that said that there really is no practical use for this. You should just treat it as applied mathematics. In fact, of course, that's turned out not to be the case at all. I did take a leave of absence to make my one visit to California about the time we're finishing the book in 64, 65. We decided that might be a good place to retire sometime. Came back to Boston, had a call from a professor from Cornell saying he's going out to start a brand new start a department of electrical engineering, a brand new university in San Diego. Would we join him? First reaction, of course, was no. Family, friends, career here. But after a couple of days, we decided that California and a brand new university, an opportunity for a different experience might be quite exciting in our lives, and we accepted. Again, the change from here to a brand new school. It was interesting, and a brand new school is very small, of course, very few faculty. One of the classes I started had to do with introduction to computer science. There were some engineering students, but there were students from mathematics and faculty from music and from the arts departments. And kind of in interacting with them, developed even a greater love and appreciation for the arts and for music that we've been able to follow then ever since. So it was very interesting being in a brand new university. But that also led to another major change in my life. Because of the MIT background, a lot of industry in Southern California, there were many requests for consulting. Typically, if you're in the faculty, you might consult a day a week. And so I mentioned that to a couple of friends from UCLA and the faculty at UCLA as we were flying back on a trip. And they said, let's start a company and share consulting. And I said, fine, as long as I don't have to get involved with managing it. And so we started a first company called Linkabit. And very quickly it began to grow. And so I did then decide to take a year off and check out business, try to get things properly organized. Didn't know really a thing about it. Luckily in the hotel school I had a course in accounting, course in business law, so a little bit of background. Turned out to be very useful, but really had to learn the business side of things. Engineering is by far the best preparation for just about any field, so that has indeed worked out very well. Well, Linkabit, this first company, did grow very nicely. We got involved in a number of interesting programs, one scrambling TV signals from satellite to home that's turned into a very major business, another what I call very small aperture earth terminals for if you put a credit card in at a gas station, often it will go over one of these satellite terminals. The first, what's called time division TDMA type of cellular phone. We got into the cellular phone business early on. And actually a processor, we didn't know the name at the time, I don't think it was really out, but a reduced instruction set processor, RISC processor, that we built into a terminal for use in government programs, and in particular for a program here at Lincoln Laboratory to communicate with what was then called the LES 8-9 satellite. So again, things tied back together very nicely, but very exciting to be able to come up with ideas, be able to apply theory to things that were rather practical, rather useful. Well, we made the mistake in a sense of selling that company, and in 1985 I retired. Retirement was a terrible thing, so I lasted about 3 months and then started Qualcomm, and I very much assured my wife that if things went very well, we might have 100 employees at some time. Put that in context, we're now over 8,000 employees. And by the way, in my welcoming, I also meant to welcome any Qualcomm shareholders that might be here today. Well, we didn't have any products. Luckily, we didn't have to go out for venture capital, so we didn't have to have a business plan. But we knew digital, we knew wireless would be very exciting. And it turned out that it was on a drive down from a consulting contract meeting in Los Angeles, a drive down to San Diego, about halfway, luckily it's 110 miles or so, about halfway down, realized that something called code division multiple access, CDMA, would be very useful for mobile communications. Well, the company was very small. We had to wait a few years before we could go ahead and develop that idea. But the time came when we sold our first product, had a little bit of a cash flow, and were able to then go back and pay attention to CDMA actually at the end of 1988. Began to take a look at it. Well, if any of you decide to go into your own businesses, and some of you I'm sure will be doing that, you run across a time when you have to make a bet the company decision. And so CDMA was one of those. Should you put a lot of money into R&D in a technology that may or may not be accepted? The world was going off in a different direction. And luckily at that time, I had not heard one of the projections that had been made to AT&T by a consultant 2 years earlier, or a few years earlier, that if all went well, there might be 1 million cell phones in use by the year 2000. Actually, they missed by a little bit. It was 600 million. And that, of course, gave a great opportunity for moving ahead with CDMA. We did develop the technology, demonstrate it, because otherwise everything sounds too complicated. You have to have demonstrations, so that was, again, one of the bet your company type issues. And then the question comes up, if you now have a good product, how do you build a business model? What do you do about that? And so again, this is a type of concern that you may be having going forward. We decided to go into a mode which was both licensing and of selling initially phones and infrastructure to get things started, but ultimately the chips. And that works out very well. As you know, chips keep getting more and more powerful. You can put more and more capability in them. If you come up with innovative ideas, you can build those into the chips. And so that's exactly the path that we followed. It's interesting that today there's probably about 1.5 billion users of cell phones around the world. In 2005, there were over 600 million sold in the 1 year, or will be by the end of the year. Comparing that to about 150 million desktop and laptop computers, it's quite clear that the future is not in plastics, but really now in mobile devices. And the interesting aspect is that the capabilities keep going up. One of the things that is now being provided is what's called third generation. I won't, again, go into details, but if some of you have been using not just the wireless that's available on campus, it's called 802.11, but a wide area coverage provided right now by Verizon here. One can get a very high data rate anywhere that you can receive a cell phone call. And so that is a key step. But the interesting part is the devices. And because of Moore's law, the number of transistors on a chip doubling roughly every 2 years or so, power going down, costs going down, all the right things kind of happening, there's been a major transformation. When we first built the first cell phone, it took 3 chips to implement the communications only. Now it takes about 20% of one chip. What do you do with the other 80%? You can put a lot of computing power. In fact, now we're going to 2 processes, one of which is moving toward a gigahertz type processing speed. 2 processes, a couple of signal processing units, a 3D graphics capability, GPS receiving. You can put a lot on that chip, make it available at a low cost, high reliability, and therefore very useful to people. Therefore, since it's a computer now, not really a phone, you may not realize it when you're carrying it around, very powerful computer that opens up many possibilities. And so we developed another approach we call RU. In fact, there's a conference now with about 2,400 people at it occurring in San Diego, where developers anywhere in the world can develop an application to be downloaded to the phone. We arrange to provide a digital signature, tested digital signature so it won't corrupt the phone. And therefore, they can develop these, bring them via some internet meeting grounds we've established with the operators, bring their applications to the attention of operators around the world and build a business. And I think at this meeting that's ongoing was mentioned that there was about $350 million that had been funneled from operators to Qualcomm and then Qualcomm back to the developers around the world in this last 6 months in the order of $150 million. So it's providing a very interesting base for people to start new companies, be able to market relatively inexpensively, have a very large market. The more exciting aspect is other things I think that we're going to be able to do with that. We've all heard of issues with the digital divide, access to communications, to the internet, being more limited in certain regions. I think that the phone is a low-cost device with a huge amount of computing power, connection to the internet, ability to download software, process it, large amount of memory, by the way, can be used with the appropriate amount of thinking and planning, can be used to supplement teaching in many remote areas, as well as, of course, developed areas around the world. So I think that there's a great possibility there to move ahead with these devices. People are still just realizing what the power in the devices might be, and again, hopefully some of you out there will find this challenging. Of course, there's also medical devices that are now being attached to the cell phone, measuring blood capabilities, and moving toward e-government, providing support, voting, information, et cetera, by use of the cell phone. So again, a device we think of as a phone, very powerful computer, opening lots of opportunities. Well, I mentioned e-government. One of the things I would like to recommend to all of you, or at least some of you, is to think, well, all of you to think about politics, to some of you perhaps to consider a career in politics. Again, I think an MIT education prepares you for just about anything. And it was interesting. I was over a couple of years ago, so it was the previous president of China. We had a meeting. They always have this very formal U, so you and the president, myself and the president was sitting at the head of the U and then staffs on either side. And there's a little bit of chit-chat that occurs before the formal meeting. What do you think the first question that was raised by the president of China, sitting next to me, how many more generations did I think Moore's law had to run? President of China. Discussing it with him a little further, it turned out that he actually was trained as an engineer, as a radio engineer, as was the prime minister at the time. That's the kind of interest and ability to, again, think about technology, bring it to use, that I think is also very important here in this country. And of course, there's very little of that available here. Another aspect, when I came to be a student here, I was lucky to benefit from the Research Laboratory of Electronics, but it was very well funded at the time. Now the funding has been cut back quite a bit. There really are reasons to get out, to become very politically active. Well, There have been many rewards from having this type of an education, being able to go out. The world is changing. One can take advantage of those changes, do very well. It's important, of course, to have an impact back, and the opportunity for philanthropy, of course, never goes away. We've been very lucky. Our focus often is on education, but also cultural activities, other activities around the world. And I think, again, that's something that as you begin to move ahead in your careers, that you should definitely pay attention to. So I'd like to finish by, again, congratulating you. You're embarking on a great adventure. You're probably entering a period where there's even greater change, greater things happening around the world than was correct when I graduated here. You might have seen the statement back from 1899 that the head of the Patent Office said that everything that can be invented has been invented. Clearly another short-sighted statement, but if you check with the Patent Office now, you'll find that many of the applications, many of the patents in the U.S. Patent Office are coming from overseas. And so, again, the competition is heightened. We have to move ahead. We have to improve our education throughout. We have to remain very innovative. You can certainly be guaranteed that there will be their changes. You have been well prepared. I wish you as much fun and excitement as I have had along the way. Thank you all very much.